Welcome to MACC Talk, a Middle Tennessee podcast from Mont Haven Arts and Cultural Center in Hendersonville, Tennessee. I'm your announcer, Kennedy Galpin. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at the Park West Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to making the arts available to everyone.
Thank you, Kennedy, and welcome everyone to MACC Talk. I'm your host, John Pitcher. We like to think of the MACC as a cultural town square where we encourage everyone to be their creative best. So, Kennedy, what sort of creative things have you been doing this week?
Yeah, so this week, as we know, I draw a lot. This week, I've been getting really into redrawing comic book panels.
Okay.
Especially the older, the better, because...
Now, describe that, a comic book panel. What is a comic book panel?
Yeah,
for those of us who don't know.
So a panel of a comic book is, you know how they're kind of split into squares, kind of?
Yeah,
typically?
yeah.
It's typically just taking one of those squares and kind of redrawing what's inside of it.
Okay.
It's a lot of fun, like especially because you
so
can see how it translates.
Your square is a blank canvas of sorts, or
kind of, yeah.
Okay.
I've been drawing it in my sketchbook, mainly my Hobonichi Tekko, trying to finish that off, and it's just kind of taking that panel and trying to redraw it in my own style in my Tekko. Okay. Just because it's fun, it's interesting, it's different.
Okay. Well,
it kind of challenges your brain of how would this artist's art style look in my art style with the same character.
So who's the artist again?
Just whoever. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It's just finding a panel you like and going, I think I could draw that.
Okay. Well, what inspired you to do this?
To test my ability.
Okay.
Just to see what I could do.
To see if you could replicate or do as well or do better.
Okay. Yeah. Especially, that's what I was saying, the older the better they are. Because a lot of the older comic book styles are so stylized to the point where it's almost a little bit absurd.
Okay.
And now they kind of lean more realistic, I'd say, nowadays. But it's just kind of taking those older comic book panels and translating them to a newer style, I'd say. I
hadn't thought about that, though, that there's more realism today. Is there a reason for that? Is it because of how they're created? Are they created more digitally?
No, well, yes, they are digitally created more often than not now, I feel, or at least digitally colored or altered in some way. Mm-hmm. But I feel like it's just what people enjoy now is more realistic looking, or there are stylized ones, obviously, but I don't know, I just feel like there are more realistic depictions. It's not super 80s looking over the top comic book looks anymore, I'd say.
Wow. So we could this could be a seminar at a Comic-Con or something. It could be like something a lot of people find interesting. Oh, yeah, I hadn't really thought about it.
A little bit of art history, I guess.
Yeah, a little art history here. Well, I'll tell you what, we've got a little bit of history coming our way now, of some very important Nashville arts history. Let's go ahead and introduce today's guest. Alan Valentine is the longtime president of the Nashville Symphony Orchestra. I think it's safe to say that the orchestra has thrived under his leadership. Since Alan's arrival in Nashville in 1998, the NSO has built one of the world's great concert halls. It has also produced more than 40 acclaimed recordings, and it has received 27 Grammy nominations and 14 Grammy Awards. In addition, the orchestra has commissioned and premiered dozens of innovative works. It has appeared at Carnegie Hall, and it now performs for more than 500,000 Middle Tennesseans annually. It's been a great run, but of course, all good things do come to an end. And last week, Alan announced that he would be retiring at the end of the 2025-26 season. So we're thrilled that he's here with us today to talk about his time in Nashville and his future plans. Alan Valentine, welcome to MACC Talk.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here. Great to see you.
Thank you so much. Well, let's just get right to the whole start of it. Why have you decided to retire at the end of this upcoming season?
Well, by the end of this coming season, I will be 68 years old. That doesn't sound very old in today's terms, but it's a point in my life where I have some other things that I really want to do. I want to pursue. And I want to do that before I'm too old to want to do it,
right?
So I, about 3 years ago, as the board and I talked about a renewal of my contract, I said, I think this one is it. Let's make a plan for a well thought out transition. I will have been here as CEO 28 years by that time. So I arrived when I was 40, a mere 40 years old. And it will be also my 45th year as an orchestra executive. So I've done this a long time, and I'm not going to leave the field. I actually intend to do some consulting work for orchestras. I have a dear friend who has for a number of years now been doing interim CEO work with orchestras, and I think I will probably pursue that line of work. And I also want to teach, because I think there's a great need for new talent to be developed in this field. And, most young people think about, music careers in terms of performance and in terms of teaching and some of those kinds of things. But it's rare for a young person to actually start out thinking about, gee, I would really like to be an administrator at an orchestra. But we really need talent, and talent that has musical sensitivity, musical knowledge. And so I think teaching would be a very fulfilling thing to do, and I've done some of it in the past. So,
okay. Well, as you said, you have been here for 28 years. After that period of time, what do you think your biggest accomplishments are? What did you get right?
Well, there were several things. Obviously, the concert hall project, the building of the Schermerhorn Symphony Center, I think is something that we as a community got right. And as an institution, I think the hall is generally regarded by most classical musicians who have performed in it or heard concerts in it as one of the great halls of the world. And we're very proud of that. Ultimately, we say, well, what does that have to do with the orchestra besides it's a nice, hall to play in? But the hall is really our primary musical instrument, and the hall made the orchestra better. I can tell you without a doubt that, that's true because, we recorded an album, if you remember, Joan Tower, the music of Joan Tower. It included Made in America. We recorded that with Leonard Slatkin back in 2006, actually before the hall opened, while Paul Scarborough, our acoustician, was still tweaking the finishes and thinking about, does he have the onstage hearing quite right and those kinds of things. And that album that year swept the classical Grammys. We won Best Orchestral Performance. The album won an award for Best Classical Album, and then also for the Best Contemporary Classical Composition for Joan's work. And so it was a real sort of turning point in the orchestra's growth and development, because finally the musicians could hear each other well on stage. And there's so many other things that grew out of that. It created an ability for the institution to really dig in on its educational mission in ways that it hadn't been able to before. So, having the space, turning the symphony from this sort of living out of the back of a truck vagabond orchestra into a destination for members of the community was really important. And I think ultimately, that was one of the things we absolutely got right. I think there were, lots of other things that, along the way that were challenging. But, the road to success is paved with challenges. Nobody gets it right from the beginning, but you learn from those mistakes and you learn from those things that happen. Some of those, of course, weren't of our making. The flood, for example, the economic meltdown, there were so many of those challenges. But we overcame those things because we had built an institution that had, I think, a really great internal culture and a really great set of tools to address those things. And that included some of the physical assets like the hall.
Yeah. Well, as a former critic who covered regional orchestras all over the country and had a chance to hear them in all sorts of different halls, to me, it was a bit of a revelation when I first came here and started hearing the Nashville Symphony play. And just as an example, I would hear something like the Tchaikovsky Fifth Symphony, and my first thought was, oh, so that's what that symphony sounds like when it's in tune.
Oh, yeah.
Because, actually the brass players can hear the string players who could then hear the wind players, and they all have to be in sync, because if they're not in sync, then the chords aren't matching up.
Exactly.
And that's called dissonance, and which is, sometimes you do have dissonance in music, we want it, but not where it's not intended. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the big things that I heard, is that the orchestra could really hear, the musicians could hear themselves, and they could respond very quickly to the music.
I remember our then concert mistress, Mary Catherine Van Osdale, saying to me after the first rehearsal in the hall, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know that was in that piece." She was hearing things for the first time, realizing, oh my goodness, there's parts here that I never even heard.
Right. And that, of course, just makes the orchestra better, right? So they can start tackling,
makes the orchestra better,
much more challenging repertoire.
And in a really great hall, there's no place to hide.
I know.
It's kind of like there's certain repertoire too that is very much like that. Like Mozart. Right? You make a mistake in Mozart, everybody knows.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And, of course, I guess, the Schermerhorn is, as they would say once about Carnegie Hall, there are no bad seats here.
Exactly.
So,
and that's really true. And, people ask me that question all the time. They ask me a lot of questions about the hall, but, where's your favorite seat? And I tell them, there really are no bad seats. Now, there's a place that I think is a little less than, but it's almost undiscernible. It's almost imperceptible. But that is under the overhang in the Founders Circle is not my favorite place.
Okay.
But that's maybe psychological.
That might be partly you,
psychosomatic, psychoacoustics.
Because, I think I've sat all over the hall, and I've gotten something different out of every place I sit. That's the thing. It's a different experience, and that's what I love. We're speaking with Nashville Symphony Orchestra President Alan Valentine. We'll be back after this important message.
The Park West Foundation is a strong supporter of arts education. The arts foster creativity, critical thinking, and emotional expression. They also enhance communication skills and cultural awareness while boosting confidence and collaboration. Students engaged in the arts often perform better academically and develop lifelong appreciation for diverse perspectives. This message was brought to you by the Park West Foundation, a champion of arts awareness and education since 2006. For more information, visit their website at parkwestfoundation.org.
We're back with Alan Valentine, who recently announced plans to retire as president of the Nashville Symphony Orchestra at the end of the 2025-26 season. Well, you alluded to some of the tough times the orchestra had gone through, and let me just get you to expound on that a little bit. Was there ever a time where you were just thinking, why the hell am I doing this?
That sometimes I think we all question ourselves at various points, especially when things are trying. I will say that following the economic meltdown, there was, the economic meltdown.
You're talking about like 2008, right?
Yeah, 2008, 9, and then 2009, 10, when the flood happened. Those two things happened in very close proximity to each other. Had we only had the recession, the Great Recession, we probably would have survived that just fine. But when the recession hit, we took the steps any institution would take to ride out that recession. We cut, expenses. We renegotiated some debt agreements. We did a number of things. But ultimately, when the economic meltdown really wasn't over yet, the flood happened in 2010. And the flood for us, because it did $40 million worth of damage to the building in the 5th year we were open, really in a way made permanent some of the damage of the Great Recession to the institution economically. And what I mean by that is what happened was, when the meltdown happened in the fall of 2008, our investment portfolio lost a tremendous amount of value, about $35 million drop just in that 1 month alone. And then at the same time, the cost of our debt went up. It tripled the cost of the letter of credit because the credit markets were frozen and we had a renewal of an LC. And so those two things taken together created this tremendous amount of pressure, and we could have survived that probably. The markets would recover and things like that happen. But when the flood happened, we had to finance the repairs to the building while we waited for things like FEMA assistance. And so, FEMA doesn't come down and write a check and say, here, fix your building. You have to repair the building, pay for it, and then collect the money. So,
and if your building's not open, that's called a loss of earned income, right?
Yeah,
that's where a lot of your money comes from.
Yeah, we had that going on at the same time. But if you think about this, we basically had investments that had been hammered by the recession. So in the spring of 2010, our investment portfolio was worth 50 cents on the dollar from where it had been in the summer of 2008. And we had to sell assets at the bottom of the market to finance the repairs. And it took 7 years to collect all the money back from the federal government from the FEMA claim. So, we took it out at 50 cents on the dollar and put it back at $1.50. Well, you can do that math.
Yeah.
So it was an expensive and challenging moment. But, if we're not anything else, we've been resilient. I think we've proven that time and again. And, when you look at the fact that we're still here, I think there were skeptics that would have said, oh, they'll never survive this. But we did. And that's a testament to this community. It's a testament to the institution, yes. But it's also a testament to the generosity of this community and how, we have donors that really care deeply about the institution and made sure that we could survive this.
Right.
And so we owe a lot of gratitude to the community.
Well, Giancarlo Guerrero, your recently departed music director, says that was sort of a big moment for him is when he realized just how much the community was behind the orchestra. They did not want to see that orchestra go.
It really was.
So here you guys still are. Well, let me ask you, and it is one of the great orchestras today, what was the orchestra like when you first got here in 1998? What drew you here?
I tell you, what drew me here was potential. I was being simultaneously recruited in a couple of other cities, and I was even offered the position in a different city for more money than what I took the job for here. Mm-hmm. But I had been to Nashville. I didn't tell the headhunter this, of course, or the search committee, but I had always thought this would be an incredible place to work because you could do projects here that you probably couldn't do anywhere else in America. And, being Music City and, given what the city's all about. So that was always appealing to me. But when I got the call, I, sort of played that cool and, came in and did the interviews. But ultimately, the thing that I saw as I talked to people, I met Martha Ingram, I met several of the board members, donors, and others in the community, the musicians, the staff. I realized this is a place filled with potential. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to take a job where you want to build an institution, potential is what you're looking for.
Right. So, well, one great potential, Kenneth Schermerhorn was here at that point, right? So
yes,
there's some great potential right there. What was his big contribution, lasting contribution, aside from being the namesake of this great concert hall? What did he do that helped really push this organization forward?
Well, Kenneth had, he was, first of all, a really great conductor. And I have to say, and a great human being, too. I mean, I think he was misunderstood by a lot of people because he was shy. And it was interesting to me because I think sometimes people mistook that shyness for aloofness. But he was anything but aloof. He was a really nice guy. But he had a vision for the orchestra, some of which persists to this day. In fact, most of it does. He wanted to build a great orchestra. He told me, I sat down with him actually after I'd been hired, but before I started my job. I came to town to, look for a place to live, take care of a few things. And we had breakfast. And I said, well, tell me what your dreams and aspirations are for the orchestra. And I just wanted to find out what he was thinking, where he was. And he said, well, when I came here because there was a promise that we could build a great orchestra. And I figured, Music City, I had done it in Milwaukee, I'd done it in New Jersey, and I thought, I've got one more left in me, and I want to do this. And he said, but we've had some fits and starts. I think there was a strike in the 80s, not long after he took the role on. Then there were some financial troubles and a bankruptcy, and there were some of those kinds of things that happened prior to my arrival here. And he said, I'm tired. I don't know if I'll even work out my finish my current contract, and I want to travel. I want to do some other things. But we started working together, and I said to him, look, I think it was in that breakfast meeting in April of '98. I said, look, I think it is possible to build a great orchestra here. I think the ingredients are here. I think, in Music City, we ought to be able to do this. But I think the biggest obstacle to doing that is the hall. And that's not an indictment of TPAC. I think TPAC's Jackson Hall was exactly the right kind of hall at the time because it gave rise to the ballet and the opera, all of which provided more work for the orchestra. And it really helped the orchestra become or reach a place in its development where it deserved a purpose-built hall. And, his reaction was very much, well, I understand that. The musicians understand we need a better hall, but how are we going to convince the leadership of the community that we need a new hall, and where in the world will we get all that money? And I said, well, I looked at him and I said, I don't know, Kenneth, but if we don't try, we're not doing our jobs. And he said, well, I suppose you're right. And we started working together. We took the orchestra on tour of the East Coast and went to Carnegie Hall for the first time and, did a number of things together. And we started having fun. But one of the things that I don't think he gets enough credit for, because each of his successors since have taken that identity and shaped it and made it their own. But Kenneth is really where this idea that the orchestra's artistic identity ought to be inextricably linked to the performance, promotion, creation, and recording, and so on, of contemporary American orchestral music. And that really came from Kenneth. He had a real penchant for the New England School of Composition. And so he loved composers like, Howard Hanson and Charles Ives and Amy Beach and, some of those composers that we've recorded over the years for Naxos. And that's really where that started. And, as we moved forward, we ended up with Leonard after Kenneth's death. Leonard Slatkin also has a very keen sense and commitment to American music. But Leonard was able to shape that and kind of make it his own. And we did this American Encores radio series. You might remember in the first couple of years the hall was open. It was syndicated by WFMT, but it was hosted by Leonard Slatkin and Edgar Meyer. And as we went through Leonard's tenure, we really expanded, what it meant to be focused on contemporary American repertoire. And when Giancarlo came in, and one of the things I thought was interesting about his interviews when we would talk with him, if you asked him about his favorite composers, he very often talked about composers that were near the beginnings of their careers or the midpoint of their careers, as opposed to other conductors who would talk about composers at the other end of their careers. And so to me, the choice became one of, when we talked about who to hire, was, do we want the future or the past?
Well, one thing that Slatkin also, not Slatkin, but one thing that Kenneth Schermerhorn brought with him, and this is sort of almost coincidental, is that connection to Naxos.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And that was really huge. And of course, you also mentioned Leonard Slatkin. Leonard Slatkin made that recording of Joan Tower's music for Naxos. It had Made in America piece on it, and which is, what more quintessential sort of American music piece could you come up with? But to me, that if there was like a real turning point in the history of the Nashville Symphony, it was probably that CD at that moment in that hall, because all of a sudden we were on the map. You guys are now worldwide. You're not just a regional orchestra like Louisville or even St. Louis. You guys are now worldwide. You're doing the big commission. Everybody knows you. Slacken was obviously the obvious choice to bring in for that. Now you're bringing him back because Giancarlo has left. Are you guys hoping that lightning strikes twice in the same place? Why are you bringing this guy back?
Well, we're bringing him back because, first of all, we know that the search is going to take us, another couple of years at least, probably. And we need artistic leadership in the interim. Mm-hmm. Leonard Slatkin has reached a place in his own career where he's decided to slow down and do what he wants to do. So he was here recently guest conducting, and, when you talk about lightning striking, it struck. As he was here, he cares deeply about this institution, about the orchestra. He considers it one of the very happy times in his career was being here. And, we all had the sense that, we missed him. We missed his leadership. He has the right kind of understanding of our artistic identity and where we're headed as an institution. And so it was really very simple to make that decision. I went to the search committee and said, I think he's interested. What do you all think? And everybody just unanimously on the search committee said, absolutely, see if he'll do it.
Oh, interesting. We're speaking with Nashville Symphony Orchestra President Alan Valentine. We'll be back after this important message.
The Park West Foundation reminds us that the arts help build well-rounded communities. They foster creativity, inclusivity, and cultural understanding. They bring people together through shared experiences and support for local identity. Art programs promote education, economic growth, and emotional well-being. Interested in expanding your own creative horizons? Registration for the MACC's Fall Art Classes is now open. Go to monthavenarts.org/classes for more information.
We're back with Alan Valentine, who recently announced plans to retire as president of the Nashville Symphony Orchestra at the end of the 2025-26 season. Well, of course, the first time that lightning struck, you guys got on the map with the Grammy Awards. It was just a world famous orchestra now.
Well, by the way, I want to say one thing about that lightning striking the first time. It wasn't so much lightning. I had to work like the devil to convince his then manager that he should come and do this with us. I had to work hard just to get him to agree to conduct the opening. And it wasn't a question of talking him into, nobody knew, as you pointed out, we were just another regional orchestra up to that point. And the first thing that he said to me at the first rehearsal that summer for that Joan Tower project, we went to lunch together, he said to me, "Oh my gosh, Alan, the world has no idea what you all have done here."
Yeah. But they were going to find out pretty soon.
Yeah.
And of course, he was followed. There were a long list of guest conductors that came in that were trying out. I got to hear them all, and they were all amazing. But Giancarlo Guerra was the one who made the biggest impression on me, and I guess in the end on everyone else.
Yes.
What do you think aside from just his love of new music, what was his contribution? What is the mark that he has left on this orchestra?
I think the mark that Giancarlo has left on the orchestra is the orchestra itself. He worked really hard to build the quality of the orchestra. He appointed a very large number of the players in the orchestra, including a number of principals. And over the course of those years, really helped to build the quality of the ensemble. He also expanded this whole notion of, the kinds of contemporary American music that we were putting on the stage. He established now Kenneth did some of this, I'll have to admit, and Leonard as well. But Giancarlo did a lot more of this, which is to really connect dots between the orchestra and what Music City's all about. You think about these pieces like commissioning Victor Wooten and Connie Ellisor to write a concerto for electric bass and orchestra, one for which Victor actually commissioned the creation of a custom electric bass that had an arced fingerboard and a bridge that was arced as well, so he could use a bow on it, and which is really just unheard of. And things like Ben Folds' Piano Concerto, which was of course a collaboration with the ballet, but it was really born in Giancarlo's office one day as Paul Vasterling, Giancarlo, and I sat and talked about ideas for creating a commission. Things like the Kip Winger commissions, not necessarily a collaboration with Kip as an artist, but as a composer, and so Giancarlo was very open-minded, and I think brought a kind of breadth and depth to the programming of the orchestra that probably most of us wouldn't have imagined a few years before.
Yeah. And sort of in the wake of these great conductors from Schermerhorn to Slacken to Guerrero, I'm wondering if Nashville now has its own sort of distinguished sound, its own unique sound. You think of Philadelphia and you think of their strings, you think of, Chicago and their brass, you think of Cleveland and you just think of the synchronization of all the different parts. Yeah. What does Nashville have its own idiosyncratic personality?
I think it does. And we hear this actually from artists. But one of the things that the Nashville Symphony really excels at is performing music that is heavily influenced by American pop culture. And by, the fact that our musicians play in the studios means they immediately understand things like Gershwin and these idiomatic things, Bernstein's music. It's like their music, they just own it in a way that a lot of orchestras don't. They can swing. They understand a lot about the sort of idiomatic devices
that's so interesting
that composers have put into that have found their way into the American orchestral canon.
And I guess a lot of that comes from also just being in Nashville, right?
Exactly. And the other thing they can do that's not well known is they can sight read anything you put in front of them,
which is not easy.
An interesting moment. I was in Giancarlo's office, just happened to be down there at the end of a rehearsal in, I guess it was a few years ago, when we did Beethoven's Fifth paired with the Christopher Rouse Fifth Symphony, which we recorded. And Chris came to the first rehearsal, and so it was like on a Tuesday morning. I went in Giancarlo's office to talk to him after the rehearsal, and Chris walked in while we were talking, and Giancarlo just stopped what he was saying, looked up at Chris and said, "Well, Chris, what did you think? What can I do differently? What do you want me to change? What did you think of the rehearsal?" And Christopher Rouse looked at him and said, "Don't change a thing."
Wow.
That rehearsal was better than the final performance in Dallas.
Oh, gosh.
That was the first rehearsal.
That's quite a statement from a Pulitzer Prize winning composer.
Exactly.
Amazing. Well, and you're speaking about the ability of these musicians to sort of be fluent in the musical vernacular of America. I remember one of your former cellists, Matt Walker, I remember seeing him. He always rode around Nashville on a little white scooter and had his giant cello case on his back.
A little Vespa scooter.
And I remember driving past him in Berry Hill once, and he was riding with his giant cello case. And later I called him and said, "Well, what were you up to? Why were you doing? Where were you driving to?" Yeah, he said, "I was just in a session with Miley Cyrus. We were cutting a record." So I think that's fairly typical for the musicians here. They're always they know how to work. They know how to play everything.
So it really makes this orchestra quite unique in a lot of ways.
Well, you've mentioned Martha Ingram, and she has been integral to the creation of this place. What was it? And you've had a great relationship with her for decades. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with her and how that's worked out.
She is an amazing woman. I would say that probably in my career, I've had a lot of people I might consider mentors, some of whom are people in the field doing what I do, like Peter Pastrike, one of my predecessors here. But then also with Martha, and I've had other people in business as mentors, but with Martha, I think I learned probably more from her than anybody else I could point to in my career. And, she's an amazing fundraiser. There's this complete inability that most people have to say no to her. She's very persuasive. And we developed this sort of, this sort of tag team approach to the way we made requests for funding for the hall together, where, I would do this pitch about what we were doing, and then she would make the ask. And over lunch in her office, and I thought, or her office building, and I thought, one of these days somebody's going to catch on to this and say, no, they're not coming to lunch. But they all came, and they all gave. You can't
say no to Martha. Anyway.
I know, they all gave. But beyond that, the other thing that Martha had was a really keen ability to grasp vision. Mm-hmm. And, when you talk about, Kenneth and I talked about the idea of a hall, and, the question was, would she even understand why TPAC was not, no longer served the needs of the orchestra, at least acoustically, in the way that sort of going to the next level required. And she not only understood it immediately, but she started doing homework, and she went to Benaroya Hall in Seattle, and she got a tour of the Meyerson, and she went to the Kimmel Center, and she studied these other scenarios, and was just one of the quickest studies I've ever seen. I mean, she just really picked up vision. She could embrace it. She understood why certain things mattered to the orchestra, and she helped us solve an incredible number of challenges along the way.
I've always gotten the sense that one thing that distinguishes her from other philanthropists or other enthusiasts is that she was an actual bona fide CEO. Exactly. She was a serious businesswoman. She knew how to make tough decisions, and she didn't fuss over things.
Exactly.
She understood that this is how you run a business, and this is a business, and we're going to run it right.
Yeah, and
I kind of get that's the sense of her.
Yeah, that's very true. And I don't think her role in the development of the orchestra to where it is today could be understated at all. And it's not just about, she gave a lot of money to help build the hall, and she raised a lot of money to help build the hall. She raised money to help fund positions in the orchestra that were critical at critical moments. And she was really keen on, you've got a vision here, here's the challenge, maybe I can do something to help unstick that. But by the same token, she wasn't ever a micromanager. She really relied on the professionals. She relied on me, for example. I'll give you a really great example of this. We used to perform concerts in the summer at Cheekwood, and we would plan, 3 concerts in June and July out at Cheekwood, and invariably we would have the plague of locusts, or it would rain, or, there were all these things that kept happening. And I went to Florida at one point and discovered that they were doing an indoor series in the summer in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, called Beethoven by the Beach. And I came back and I said, maybe we should just move indoors. They just took the seats out of War Memorial Auditorium. What if we played our summer concerts indoors and we don't have all these other problems? Now it means moving them downtown to War Memorial, but we could create the same idea. You bring your picnic basket, you have dinner in the hall, we clear the dishes, and then the orchestra takes the stage and we have a Beethoven concert. And maybe for the people in the balcony, we can set up tables on the plaza. And so we made this big pivot. But, when we decided to do this, there were a lot of people who felt very attached to going out to Cheekwood to hear the orchestra, and for good reason. I mean, Cheekwood's beautiful. We love Cheekwood. Martha was one of those. She loved taking her grandkids out to hear the orchestra outdoors. So she basically tested me every way from Sunday to make sure I believed what I was telling her and saying to her about the success of this new enterprise. And then she ended it with, after making her case, she said, well, you're the professional, we'll do it your way. and so that was great. So we moved into War Memorial, and by the second concert, we were sold out. And she came to me and said, well, you were right. And the interesting thing about that is that if the opposite were true, she never would have said, I told you so.
Oh, very nice. That's a nice thing to have.
And I'll tell you that moment when she could have said that there was a debate about whether to put the hall here on the site that we currently occupy or to put it up on Rutledge Hill, overlooking, on the bluff, overlooking the river. And if we'd have put it up on that bluff, it wouldn't have flooded.
Oh my gosh.
And so after the flood, at one point we were talking, and I said, well, Martha, I know that we talked about the bluff on the hill, and maybe we should have done that. And she said, you just put that out of your mind right now. We built it in the right place.
Okay. We're speaking with Nashville Symphony Orchestra President Alan Valentine. We'll be back after this important message.
The Park West Foundation is a strong supporter of arts education. The arts foster creativity, critical thinking, and emotional expression. They also enhance communication skills and cultural awareness while boosting confidence and collaboration. Students engaged in the arts often perform better academically and develop lifelong appreciation for diverse perspectives. This message was brought to you by the Park West Foundation, a champion of arts awareness and education since 2006. For more information, visit their website at parkwestfoundation.org.
We're back with Alan Valentine, who recently announced plans to retire as president of the Nashville Symphony Orchestra at the end of the 2025-26 season. Well, Alan, I appreciate your taking so much time with us. Maybe just one more question. I know you alluded to your plans for the future, talking about some teaching and consulting, but I'm wondering if there might be some more music in your future. A lot of people might not know, but you're a serious musician.
Oh, yeah. Well,
tell me about that.
I was a much more serious musician when I was younger, of course, because I had a lot more time to practice. I've heard you actually talking about practicing the piano.
Oh, yeah. I did a little bit here and there.
And, but I love playing the drums. I play I'm playing in the second band that I've played in Nashville. I was in a band called Time for 12 years. Time is still doing some recording just for fun. But I'm now playing in a band called Logebox One, and we're out doing things. We did the Streets of Indian Lake summer concert series recently, and anyway, but yeah, I want to play more. I want to do more with the music, and I'll certainly have a lot more time to practice, I hope.
Okay.
So I'm looking forward to all of those things.
Okay, you'll finally have more time to practice, more time to think about fewer things. So that'll be outstanding. Alan Valentine, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, John. It was a great pleasure.
You've been listening to MACC Talk from Mont Haven Arts and Cultural Center. Our mission is to educate, elevate, and encourage our community through the transformative power of the arts. If you're interested in transforming your creative life, check out our website at monthavenarts.org. Our guest today was Alan Valentine, president of the Nashville Symphony Orchestra. Our podcast music was written by Nashville composer Christina Spinay. I'm Kennedy Galpin. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.